The alert didn't sound real. It looked fake at first glance, like one of those screenshots fans make just to stir chaos. But this one came stamped with verification, timestamps, and numbers so absurd they punched the breath out of the sports world in seconds. Caitlin Clark hadn't just broken a record. She'd crossed a line no one thought women's basketball would touch this soon. Her collectibles had officially surpassed LeBron James and Stephen Curry in overnight demand, resale value, and global traffic. At first, people laughed. Then they refreshed. Then they panicked. Trading platforms froze under traffic. Card graders stopped taking submissions. Auction houses scrambled to confirm bids that kept jumping in real time. A rookie-era Caitlin Clark card spiked past six figures before breakfast. A signed Iowa jersey eclipsed championship-era Curry memorabilia. Even hardened collectors went quiet, staring at screens like they were watching history rewrite itself without permission. And that's when the backlash hit. How is this possible? Is this a bubble? Who's manipulating the market? The questions weren't just financial, they were existential. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not her. Not in a space dominated for decades by men whose legacies were considered untouchable. Inside the WNBA, phones started ringing that hadn't rung like this before. Agents, executives, sponsors, overseas investors. Everyone wanted in. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted control. Caitlin Clark was at practice when she found out. No cameras. No podium. Just a quiet moment where her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, and the weight of something far bigger than basketball settled into her chest. This wasn't hype anymore. This was power. And power never moves without consequences. Because the moment Caitlin Clark surpassed legends, she didn't just make history. She threatened an entire hierarchy. And someone somewhere was already preparing to push back. Caitlin Clark's rise didn't start with collectibles, auctions, or headlines screaming about LeBron and Curry. It started in quiet gyms with worn nets and empty bleachers, where greatness didn't feel glamorous, it felt lonely. Long before her name shook markets, it stirred arguments. Too confident, too loud, too visible. Caitlin learned early that every bucket came with judgment, and every celebration came with consequences. She kept shooting anyway. The deeper her range grew, the more uncomfortable the conversation became. She wasn't just breaking records, she was bending expectations. Fans packed arenas, not because they were told to, but because something electric followed her everywhere. Cameras lingered longer. Critics sharpened faster. Caitlin became a phenomenon before she was allowed to be comfortable with it. What most people missed was the pressure beneath the fireworks. Every logo 3 carried attacks. Every viral clip invited comparisons she never asked for. The next Steph, the female Curry, as if her greatness required translation through a male lens to be legitimate. Caitlin heard it all. She smiled through it publicly, but privately, it carved something sharp inside her. Why was excellence never enough on its own? As her on-court legacy grew, something else quietly followed: collectability. Fans didn't just want tickets. They wanted pieces of her. Jerseys sold out in minutes. Autographed balls vanished instantly. Trading cards that should have been niche exploded. Collectors whispered first, then spoke louder. There was something different here. Demand wasn't being pushed. It was pulling. Still, the establishment didn't treat it seriously. Women's sports memorabilia had always been framed as emerging, developing, promising. Never dominant. Never disruptive. Caitlin's name was profitable, yes, but never threatening. Until suddenly it was. The emotional history of that shift mattered more than numbers. Caitlin had grown used to being doubted, but this was different. This wasn't skepticism about her shot selection or defense. This was disbelief that her influence could touch spaces guarded by legends. LeBron James and Stephen Curry weren't just players. They were economies. Entire markets built on decades of validation, nostalgia, and cultural dominance. When Caitlin's collectibles began climbing, analysts dismissed it as hype. A moment. A trend. But moments don't hold overnight. Trends don't swallow platforms whole. As bids rose, so did discomfort. It wasn't just that a woman was competing. It was that she was winning without asking permission. Inside the WNBA, emotions split. Pride collided with anxiety. Executives celebrated publicly, but privately questioned what this meant for control. If Caitlin's name alone could move markets, who owned that power? The league? The sponsors? Or Caitlin herself? History suggested the answer would never be allowed to be simple. Caitlin felt the shift before it was named. Conversations changed tone. People leaned indifferently. Compliments carried calculation. Her brand meetings felt heavier, more cautious, like everyone was trying to harness lightning without getting burned. She wasn't naive. Power attracts interest. It also attracts resistance. Emotionally, the weight doubled. Caitlin wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was carrying expectation. For the league, for women's basketball, for every player told their ceiling was smaller. That responsibility wasn't assigned. It attached itself silently, tightening with every headline. She remembered watching legends growing up, not thinking about markets or resale value, just magic. Now she was the magic, and it came with balance sheets and suspicion. People debated whether her success was real, as if fans around the world were colluding in a coordinated illusion. And yet, collectors didn't lie. They didn't argue ideology. They followed demand. And demand followed Caitlin relentlessly. Her story cards became artifacts. Her early signatures turned into investments. People weren't buying just ink and cardboard. They were buying belief. A piece of history forming in real time. Emotionally, that realization hit her harder than any record. This wasn't validation from critics. This was something deeper. Unfiltered. Uncontrolled. People choosing her without being told to. But with that came fear. If she could rise this fast, she could be targeted just as quickly. Systems don't like being outrun, especially by someone they didn't build to win. Caitlin carried that awareness quietly. She trained harder. She spoke carefully. She guarded her circle. Because deep down, she understood something most didn't yet. Surpassing legends wasn't just about numbers. It was about threatening the story of who gets to be untouchable. And stories like that never go unchallenged. Not for long. The first sign of trouble wasn't outrage. It was silence. As Caitlin Clark's collectibles crossed thresholds once reserved for LeBron James and Stephen Curry, the loudest institutions went quiet. No congratulatory posts from legacy auction houses. No celebratory press releases from platforms that usually rushed to attach themselves to history. Behind the scenes, however, alarms were screaming. Market analysts refreshed dashboards in disbelief as graphs climbed past guardrails designed to catch anomalies. Overnight demand didn't taper. It multiplied. International buyers flooded in from markets that rarely touched women's basketball cards. A Clark rookie parallel doubled, then tripled, before the system could even flag it. A Curry Finals card stalled. A LeBron auto dipped. For the first time in decades, gravity shifted. That's when the questions turned sharp. Private group chats among collectors lit up with suspicion masquerading as concern. This isn't organic. Someone's propping this up. There's no way the floor holds. The language wasn't neutral. It was defensive. Because what was really being threatened wasn't money. It was mythology. The belief that certain names were permanent ceilings. Inside one major collectibles platform, an emergency meeting was called. Executives debated throttling visibility to stabilize user experience. A euphemism. They worried that spotlighting Clark's surge would invite backlash from legacy partners whose inventories were suddenly wobbling. Contracts were reviewed. Clauses were tested. No one wanted to be the company that legitimized a market shift this disruptive. Meanwhile, Caitlin was still practicing. She learned about the chaos between drills, scrolling through alerts that felt unreal. Another record. Another spike. Another comparison headline she never asked for. Teammates joked about retirement plans. She laughed with them, but her stomach tightened. Because the tone had changed. This wasn't celebration anymore. It was scrutiny. The first public pushback came disguised as analysis. A prominent collector with ties to multiple auction houses went live and questioned the sustainability of Clark's market. He talked about demographics, historical comps, and irrational exuberance. He never mentioned LeBron or Curry directly, but the implication hung heavy. When viewers pushed back, he smiled and said, "Let's not get emotional." That clip exploded. Fans didn't just defend Caitlin. They dragged receipts, sales data, timestamps. Independent trackers showed clean volume, broad distribution, real money. This wasn't one whale manipulating prices. It was thousands of buyers choosing her. The defense was relentless, and it worked. Prices climbed again. That's when the twist hit. Without warning, one major platform quietly suspended trading on select Caitlin Clark items, citing verification audits. No announcement, no timeline, just a freeze. Collectors woke up locked out of listings mid-auction. Bids vanished. Momentum stalled artificially. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Why only Clark? Why now? Who called this? The explanation didn't hold. Verification audits were routine and never targeted a single athlete at peak demand. The move reeked of interference. Fans accused the platform of protecting legacy assets. Analysts tried to calm the waters. It only made things worse. Caitlyn's agent called immediately. So did her brand partners. So did people she'd never spoken to before, suddenly offering guidance. The message was consistent. This was bigger than her, which only confirmed the fear curling in her chest. Behind closed doors, the real fight erupted. Auction houses pressured platforms to slow the surge. Longtime collectors threatened to pull inventory. Sponsors asked whether Caitlyn's market volatility posed reputational risk. The word volatility became a weapon. It framed organic demand as instability. It justified intervention. Caitlyn listened as it was explained to her like a weather system she couldn't control. This happens when markets mature, they said. It'll normalize. Normalize to what? She didn't ask out loud. She already knew the answer. Normalize to comfort. The backlash escalated when leaked emails surfaced. Not from Caitlyn's camp, from the industry. Messages between executives discussing protecting flagship assets and avoiding precedent. Caitlyn's name appeared in threads she'd never been invited to. Not as a person, as a variable. The leak detonated trust. Collectors revolted. Independent platforms popped up overnight, advertising no throttling, no interference. Clark items migrated instantly. Prices rebounded harder than before. A signed Clark card closed at a number that forced even skeptics to go silent. That silence didn't last. A respected analyst dropped a bombshell report claiming Caitlyn's market was being artificially boosted by coordinated fan behavior. No proof, just theory. The headline spread faster than the correction that followed hours later. Damage was done. Doubt seeped back in. Caitlyn felt it personally for the first time. Interviews shifted. Questions about her play were replaced with questions about brand responsibility. As if she controlled secondary markets. As if success now required justification. She answered calmly, but inside anger sparked. Why did surpassing legends require explanation, while legends were allowed to simply exist? The twist deepened when a Curry memorabilia partnership announced a limited release the same week. Strategically priced, aggressively marketed, positioned to reassert dominance. The timing was surgical. The message unmistakable. This wasn't coincidence. Fans noticed. They pushed back. Instead of cooling Caitlyn's market, the move inflamed it. Buyers saw the play for what it was, protectionism. Clark's sales surged again, crossing a psychological line no women's athlete had touched before. 6 figures became expected. 7 figures were whispered. That's when the league stepped in. Quietly, carefully. WNBA executives expressed concern about off-court narratives overshadowing the game. They suggested Caitlyn temper public commentary. They framed it as protection. But Caitlyn heard the undertone. Don't poke the machine. She faced a choice she never wanted. Speak up and risk being labeled disruptive. Stay quiet and let others shape the story of her success. Either way, the pressure tightened. This wasn't about basketball cards anymore. It was about who gets to redefine value. The shocking truth settled in. Caitlyn Clark hadn't just surpassed LeBron and Curry collectibles. She'd exposed how fragile the hierarchy really was. And the people invested in keeping it intact were running out of subtle ways to do it. What followed wasn't correction. It was retaliation disguised as caution. Within 48 hours of Caitlyn Clark's collectibles rebounding, the market stopped behaving like a market and started behaving like a battlefield. Algorithms changed overnight. Search results shifted. Listings that once sat front and center were suddenly buried beneath unrelated inventory. Collectors noticed instantly. You don't spend years reading markets without sensing when the air pressure changes. Then came the expert panels. Networks rolled out roundtables filled with voices that had never cared about women's memorabilia before. They spoke in measured tones about long-term sustainability, fan-driven inflation, and the risk of emotional buying. Caitlyn's name hovered over every sentence like a warning label. The subtext was unmistakable. This success needed to be contained before it became precedent. Collectors didn't buy it. Independent trackers released data proving something the panels wouldn't say out loud. Caitlyn's buyer base was broader than LeBron's at the same stage. Younger, more global, less speculative. Her market wasn't top-heavy. It was deep. That terrified people who thrived on predictability. And then the second major twist detonated. A leaked internal memo from a global memorabilia conglomerate surfaced online. Not speculation, not theory. A document, time-stamped, authenticated. It outlined a risk mitigation strategy aimed at preventing non-core athlete dominance from destabilizing flagship asset categories. Caitlin Clark's name appeared under a bolded subheading, Case Study, Rapid Ascension Risk. The memo didn't call for bans. That would have been too obvious. It recommended pricing friction, visibility modulation, and strategic release timing to restore balance. In plain language, slow her down without saying why. The internet exploded. Fans weren't just angry, they were vindicated. This wasn't about bubbles or hype. This was about control, about deciding who was allowed to win big and who needed to be paced for everyone else's comfort. Caitlin saw the memo late that night. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, realizing something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't resistance to her talent. It was fear of her influence. Markets don't panic over players. They panic over movements. Her phone rang nonstop. Advisors urged restraint. Brands asked whether she'd comment. League contacts suggested silence until things cooled. The same phrase repeated everywhere. Cool it down. Let it pass. Don't escalate. But escalation was already happening, just not from her side. Collectors began boycotting platforms named in the memo. Listings vanished. Entire inventories were pulled. Alternative marketplaces surged overnight, proudly advertising Clark forward policies. It wasn't organized by Caitlin. It was organic outrage weaponized by loyalty. Prices spiked again. A Caitlin Clark one-of-one closed at a figure that forced mainstream outlets to cover it despite themselves. The headline couldn't avoid the truth anymore. She wasn't just beating legends, she was reshaping the rules of value. That's when legacy voices turned hostile. A former executive went on record calling the situation dangerous for the hobby. Another warned that letting emotion dictate markets erodes tradition. Tradition became the shield, as if tradition had never excluded anyone before. Caitlin felt the narrative tightening around her. Too powerful, too fast, too disruptive. The same language she'd heard on the court now echoed in boardrooms. Then came the call that changed everything. A high-level industry intermediary, someone with no public affiliation, reached out privately. No congratulations. No pleasantries. Just a message. There's interest in stabilizing this. Cooperation would help. Caitlin asked what cooperation meant. The response was chillingly polite. Less public commentary. Strategic release pacing. Fewer surprise drops. In exchange, long-term security. Translation. Slow yourself down and we'll protect you. She ended the call shaking. This was the moment no one saw. The offer that never trends. Power doesn't always block you. Sometimes it asks you to compromise quietly. Caitlin didn't answer right away. Instead, she went to practice early the next morning, headphones on, drowning out the noise. Basketball was the only space that still felt honest. But even there, teammates asked questions. Coaches mentioned distractions. The off-court chaos was bleeding into the gym. The league noticed too. WNBA leadership scheduled a check-in under the guise of support. They expressed pride, then concern. They reminded her she represented something bigger now. The word responsibility hovered heavy. Caitlin nodded, but inside, something hardened. Later that day, another leak hit. This time, it wasn't about Caitlin. It was about comparison. An internal valuation report ranking athlete memorabilia growth potential over the next decade. Caitlin topped the list. Above active NBA superstars. Above retired legends. The projection wasn't subtle. It was seismic. The report went viral. The reaction was nuclear. Critics accused analysts of erasing history. Supporters argued history was being written. The debate consumed sports media for days. But beneath the noise, one truth settled in. Caitlin Clark wasn't a phase. She was a future. And futures threaten entrenched interests. The pressure crescendoed when a major sponsor quietly paused a planned Caitlin collectible collaboration. No explanation. Just timing concerns. Fans connected the dots instantly. The backlash was swift. Hashtags trended. Emails flooded inboxes. The sponsor reversed course within 24 hours. Power blinked. Caitlin watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and dread. This wasn't just about her anymore. People were using her name to challenge systems they'd never trusted. She'd become a symbol without volunteering. The second twist landed fully when another memo leaked, this one from a league-adjacent entity, suggesting the creation of tiered athlete market narratives to prevent distortion. Caitlin's name was again central. The pattern was undeniable. She was being managed. That night, Caitlin finally spoke. Not in an interview. Not on a network. She posted a single message on her own platform. No accusations. No numbers. Just truth. I don't control what people value, she wrote. I just show up. If that makes history uncomfortable, maybe it's time to ask why. The post went viral in minutes. Markets reacted immediately. Prices surged. Silence from institutions followed. Caitlin felt the line snap. There was no going back to being just a player whose success could be quietly redirected. She'd refused the soft leash. And now, whatever came next would be loud. Because the hierarchy hadn't lost yet. But it had been exposed. And exposed systems don't de-escalate, they strike back. The fallout didn't arrive quietly. It slammed into every corner of the sports world at once. By sunrise, Caitlin Clark's post had crossed platforms, languages, and borders. Fans didn't just share it, they dissected it. Screenshots flooded timelines. Reaction videos stacked by the hour. Commentators tried to soften it, critics tried to spin it, but the emotional truth cut through everything. A young star had calmly called out a system without naming it, and the system felt seen. Collectors reacted first. Markets don't wait for permission. Clark listings surged across independent platforms as buyers made statements with their wallets. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Some called it rebellion. Others called it recklessness. Most called it overdue. The numbers told the real story. Despite attempted throttles, Caitlin's collectibles didn't dip. They hardened. Floors rose. Panic selling vanished. Belief replaced speculation. Inside the league, the mood fractured. Teammates publicly backed Caitlin, liking posts, sharing clips, speaking carefully but firmly. Privately, emotions ran hotter. Some players felt inspired. Others felt exposed. If Caitlin could force this conversation, what did that mean for everyone who'd been told to wait their turn? Locker rooms buzzed with equal parts pride and fear. Power shifts create hope and anxiety. Coaches were pulled into meetings. Executives drafted statements they never released. The league's silence grew louder by the hour. Fans noticed. Media noticed. Silence started looking like alignment. Then the backlash sharpened. A wave of op-eds accused Caitlin of destabilizing a fragile ecosystem. Phrases like unintended consequences and responsibility to the sport appeared everywhere. The implication was subtle but cutting. Her success was too loud, too disruptive, too fast. It needed moderation, preferably by people who had never needed it themselves. Caitlin watched it all from a distance that felt unreal. Her phone was a minefield. Support messages from legends. Warning texts from advisors. Emotional notes from young players saying they finally felt seen. The weight of it pressed down harder than any defense ever had. She hadn't asked to be a lightning rod. But lightning doesn't ask where it strikes. The emotional toll crept in quietly. Practices felt heavier. Eyes lingered longer. Every smile was analyzed. Every silence interpreted. She felt the pressure to be perfect, measured, calm. Because any crack would be used as proof that she couldn't handle the moment. The same standards she'd been breaking now boxed her in. Public reaction fractured into camps. One side hailed her as a pioneer who forced transparency. The other painted her as a destabilizer playing with forces she didn't understand. The middle, once neutral, began choosing sides. That's when the narrative truly slipped out of institutional control. Then came the fan marches. Unplanned, organic, emotional. Outside arenas. Outside corporate offices. Handmade signs with Clark's name beside words like value, truth, and let her rise. This wasn't just about collectibles anymore. It was about respect. About who decides worth. Media tried to pivot the story back to basketball, but the damage, or the awakening, was done. Every Caitlin bucket now carried symbolism. Every cheer felt political. Every miss magnified tension. She could feel it in the air, thick and electric. Behind the scenes, sponsors scrambled. Some doubled down, releasing statements of support. Others hesitated, afraid of being on the wrong side of a shifting line. One major partner quietly reduced visibility of Clark-related campaigns and was immediately called out by fans. The reversal came within hours. Public pressure was winning battles no one expected it to. Caitlyn's emotional core wavered for the first time. Not doubt in herself, but fear of collateral damage. Was she putting others at risk? Was the backlash spreading too wide? Nights grew restless. Sleep came late. The gym became her refuge, the only place where noise faded into rhythm. Then a former WNBA star spoke publicly. She backed Caitlyn outright, calling the situation a long overdue reckoning. Her words cracked something open. More voices followed. Current players, retired legends, even athletes from other sports who'd watched similar systems close ranks when threatened. Solidarity surged. The league could no longer stay silent. A carefully worded statement dropped, emphasizing commitment to fairness and respect for all athletes. It said nothing and everything. Fans tore it apart. Analysts called it evasive. Caitlyn read it twice and felt nothing. The distance between words and action had never felt wider. Emotionally, she stood at a crossroads. She could retreat, let the storm pass, allow the system to reassert itself slowly. Or she could stand firm, knowing every step forward would trigger another wave. The fallout reached its peak when leaked audio surfaced, an off-record conversation between industry insiders discussing weathering the Clark cycle. The phrase alone reignited outrage. The implication was clear: wait her out. Caitlyn listened to the clip alone. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't about cycles. This was about control. And control was slipping. She took a breath, knowing whatever she did next wouldn't just define her career. It would define how far this fight went. Because the storm hadn't passed. It was only gathering strength. The final twist didn't come from a headline. It came from a document no one was supposed to see. Late one night, while the public argued and the league stalled, a sealed report leaked from a private valuation firm that advised multiple leagues, sponsors, and memorabilia conglomerates at once. It wasn't opinion. It wasn't commentary. It was strategy. A cold, precise blueprint outlining what would happen if Caitlyn Clark's market was allowed to continue unchecked. The conclusion hit like a body blow. Within 18 months, Caitlyn Clark's collectibles would permanently reorder the global sports memorabilia hierarchy. Not temporarily. Not symbolically. Structurally. The report projected a cascade effect. Younger collectors abandoning legacy-first models, women's sports assets accelerating faster than forecast, and most damning of all, brand leverage shifting away from institutions and toward athletes themselves. That was the threat. Buried deep in the appendix was the recommendation that froze the industry's blood: preemptive narrative realignment. The language was sterile, but the intent was brutal. Shape perception now, or lose control later. Caitlyn wasn't just winning markets. She was shortening the distance between talent and power. The leak detonated everything. Fans didn't need interpretation this time. The receipts were undeniable. Charts, projections, risk flags. Caitlyn Clark wasn't a bubble. She was a breach. And breaches get sealed. Within hours, a counteroffensive began. Anonymous sources fed journalists stories about locker room discomfort. Old clips were resurfaced, stripped of context, framed as ego. Pundits questioned whether Caitlyn understood the responsibility of influence. The shift was obvious. When numbers failed, character was next. Caitlyn felt it immediately. The tone of interviews sharpened. Smiles turned conditional. Questions stopped being curious and started being prosecutorial. She answered calmly, but inside a line was forming. She recognized the pattern. This wasn't criticism, it was containment. Then came the call she never expected. A representative from a major cross-sport governing body reached out directly. No assistance. No buffers. The voice was polite, controlled, almost rehearsed. They praised her impact, acknowledged the momentum, and then delivered the message. There's concern this moment is moving faster than the ecosystem can support. The implication was unmistakable. Slow down or be slowed. Caitlyn asked a single question. Who decides what the ecosystem can support? The silence on the other end lasted too long. That night, another twist surfaced. This one emotional, not strategic. A private message from a legendary athlete she'd idolized growing up. The note was short, honest, painfully clear. They did this to me too. I wish I'd known sooner. It shattered the last illusion. This wasn't new. It was just finally visible. Caitlyn didn't sleep. She replayed everything, The quiet gyms, the doubts, the comparisons, the market surge, the memos, the silence. All of it pointed to one truth she could no longer ignore. Her success had crossed from impressive to dangerous. The next morning, the final twist hit publicly. An independent platform released verified data proving something industry leaders had denied for months. Caitlin Clark's collectibles weren't just outperforming LeBron and Curry in growth. They were outperforming them in retention. Buyers weren't flipping. They were holding. This wasn't speculation. It was conviction. That single metric changed everything. Retention meant belief. Belief meant permanence. Permanence meant the hierarchy wasn't bending, it was breaking. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Legacy platforms rushed to announce inclusive initiatives. Sponsors scrambled to reframe narratives they'd quietly resisted. The league issued another statement. Longer this time, warmer in tone, still vague in action. Too late. The data had spoken louder than words ever could. Caitlin watched the numbers update in real time. She felt no triumph, no relief, only resolve. Because now she understood the final truth of the twist. This fight was never about collectibles. They were just the scoreboard. The real game was about who gets to redefine value without asking permission. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her agent. Short. Urgent. They're planning a coordinated reset. Media. Platforms. Timing. All of it. Caitlin closed her eyes. The storm wasn't over. It was reorganizing. She stood at the edge of a moment no athlete in women's sports had ever reached, where silence meant surrender and speaking meant escalation on a scale no one could fully predict. She opened her notes app, typed one sentence, deleted it, typed another. Somewhere between the numbers and the noise, Caitlin Clark realized the most dangerous thing she could do next wasn't to shout. It was to choose exactly when to speak. And the world had no idea which side of history that choice was about to land on. This is the moment where watching stops being enough. Because Caitlin Clark's story isn't just unfolding, it's being decided in real time. Every click, every share, every comment, every refusal to let this narrative get buried is pressure. And pressure is the only language power understands. If you think this is about collectibles, you've already been distracted. This is about who gets to rise without permission. About how quickly success turns from celebrated to concerning, the moment it threatens old hierarchies. About how women's greatness is applauded right up until it becomes undeniable. Right now, forces bigger than one player are betting on silence. They're betting this moment fades. That outrage cools. That attention drifts. That Caitlin becomes manageable again. History says they usually win that bet. Unless people don't let them. If you believe Caitlin Clark earned every inch of this moment, say it loudly. If you see the pattern, praise turning into pressure, success turning into scrutiny, call it out. If you're tired of watching women's sports get capped the second they break through, don't scroll past it. Engage. Share. Debate. Push back. Because the narrative war is already happening whether you participate or not. Silence doesn't stay neutral, it chooses a side. Watch how media frames the next headline. Watch which platforms elevate her and which suddenly reassess. Watch who speaks up and who disappears. None of it is accidental anymore. And most importantly, watch Caitlin Clark. Because what she does next won't just affect her career. It will ripple through how women's sports are valued, marketed, protected, or restrained for years to come. This is bigger than one record. Bigger than one market. Bigger than one season. This is a test. Of fans. Of institutions. Of whether progress is real or conditional. So if you're still here, don't just consume the story. Be part of the pressure that shapes it. Because Caitlin Clark is standing at the edge of a decision that could redraw the rules. And the only question left is whether the world will be watching quietly, or loudly enough to make it impossible to ignore.